So it seems like every day we hear about another hacking scandal, another company that was broken into, thousands, hundreds of thousands of credit card numbers stolen. And so one of the people here at Berkeley who is working to understand how these cyber crimes occur and developing techniques to combat them is Professor Vern Paxson.
Thank you. Good morning. So, the motivation behind the research I'm going to sketch now is different than how do these attacks themselves specifically occur. And in fact, the way we think of this is we've been playing whack-a-mole in terms of technical security for years now. Which is, new threat comes, we develop some technical counter to it, we deploy it, new threat comes, develop new counter. This seems like a never-ending struggle. So the goal for the work I'm going to talk about is to approach this problem from a very different perspective. And we're looking specifically at the major subset of modern attacks that are fueled by cybercrime, by the ultimate motive of our adversaries is to make money in some illegal fashion. We can think of these illegal fashions as ranging from a spectrum. A bunch of it is driven by essentially advertising and sales, and that is what spam is usually trying to do, sell something. Fake antivirus is moving more towards the spectrum of out-and-out fraud, where the user thinks they're infected even though they're not, and they're told, hey, if you buy our tool, you'll be disinfected. Quick fraud is taking advantage of the advertising ecosystem that fuels a lot of the internet's content, very rich content dissemination by fooling advertisers into thinking that their ads have been clicked on by interested people when in fact they haven't. Money changes hands every time an ad is viewed or acted on. And then to out and out theft of money, just straight from accounts and the like. So this is a wide range. And for our purposes, what's salient about it in particular is there's an entire infrastructure out there that supports it. And the infrastructure has a striking scale. The scale leads to the efficiencies of a sort of sub-economy. We've got marketplace specialization, the ability for people to just get good at one thing rather than having to put together an entire soup to nuts enterprise. And many of the things that they might get good at are even potentially legal, in which case they face a lot less stress. So the market has evolved. This sort of started in the mid 2005 sort of time frame. One thing that benefits us defenders, now the scale of it is not good. It means it's out there and very prevalent and capable. But the scale also means that you have many actors who are dealing with other actors they do not know. And therefore, there's opportunity to infiltrate different facets of this ecosystem to illuminate how it works and potentially disrupt it. So that's what I'll be talking about. I'm going to start with pay per install services. I'm going to frame two of our efforts in this regard. We have been working on this for 3 or 4 years now. So this service, which is part of the overall ecosystem, is you can think of brokers who sell installations of malicious software on newly compromised systems. The brokers, their clientele comes in and say, I would like to put this bad piece of software on computer systems. I don't want to have to go to the trouble of breaking into the systems. The broker says, no problem, just give me your badness and I will make sure it gets on compromised systems. The broker does not themselves go out and break into these systems. They have affiliates who do that. So the affiliates specialize, and I'm going to illustrate this in a minute, structurally how this works. The affiliates specialize in knowing how to break into systems. They don't then know how to monetize those systems. other than by having the broker pay them for having compromised the systems. So this is a web page from one such program, installs4sale.net. You can see that it has a motif of easy money. If you look really hard, these are $1 bills, so it's sort of focusing on losers who don't pay attention. But this web page is to entice the affiliates who can come, break into systems, and make lots of money and get a Cadillac. It's in Russian. That's more or less the de facto language of the underground. Here's another one that has both Russian and English web pages, Gangsta Bucks. Again, this is targeting the affiliates. And one thing, you can't really read it, but it says like here, round-the-clock support. So what I want to illustrate with that is how this is a fairly polished business. It's not just some sort of informal get-together or chat among bad actors. It's a business. Now, the way this works structurally, and the structure is going to be important for our purposes, clients come to the broker, this is the pay-per-install service, that's the broker, and want to put on a bunch of systems, different types of malicious software that the client does know how to monetize. The broker has recruited affiliates and gives the affiliates a program, a downloader program. The affiliate then breaks into systems however they can. And notice they're just incented to innovate as broadly as they can. The better they innovate in this space, the more money they're going to make. However they can break into a system, they do that and they run the downloader program. The program phones home to the pay-per-install service, to the broker, says, hey, what badness would you like on this newly compromised system? Back comes all the badness that the broker has arranged with the clients to install. And now the broker pays the affiliate. That's what happens structurally, and this is why when your system gets compromised today, it doesn't wind up with one piece of badness on it, it often winds up with a half dozen, because the broker has sold to multiple parties the installation on that system. Here is a page from one of those affiliate programs discussing the different pricing associated with different geographic regions. Like Canada is going to cost $1,000, Italy, sorry, $100, Italy, $120, US, $130, and right over here it says per 1,000. So if you want to install your spam bot, your keylogger, your fake antivirus on 1,000 systems in the United States, it's about $130. Dirt cheap. Pennies per system. That pricing is a striking illustration of how good the whole machinery of compromising systems has gotten. It's just worth pennies to break into a system because it's so easy that the pricing is only in units of thousands. It's not even interesting to talk about a mere dozen compromised systems. Okay, so this is the ecosystem that I want to first talk about and illustrate the notion of infiltration as a way to illuminate the ecosystem. Back to this structural diagram. This right here, this downloader program, that is an infiltration opportunity. Since I have limited time, I'm not going to discuss in detail technically what we do, but let me give you the flavor of it. When this program runs, there's some protocol that it uses to communicate over the internet to the broker's server to say, hey, I've got a new machine, what do you want on it? And the broker to then send over the badness. With a bunch of work, which was sort of elbow grease on the part of energetic students, we reverse engineered this protocol so we know exactly how it is built. The bad guys have not faced much evolutionary pressure in terms of themselves thinking about adversaries messing with their mechanisms, which means that our program can then just shamelessly keep connecting, saying, hey, I've compromised a new system, which is not true. What would you like on it? And suck down as much different badness as the broker's willing to send. We shamelessly run an emulator that just shamelessly says more, 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 more. We call this process milking, because it is analogous to just shamelessly taking milk out of cows for our own benefit. So the milker is the downloader that we're mimicking. We run it in Amazon EC2, which gives us locations throughout the world, and we use the Tor anonymity system, which also gives us locations throughout the world. So we have all this geographic diversity through which we run our milker. Talk to the servers for these programs. We did this for 4 different programs. Suck down a huge number of binaries, execute them in a contained environment in order to profile them and understand their behavior and which families they're associated with. Develop signatures that describe them so we can cluster them, and then have, at the end of the day, this big pile of binaries that we have grouped into families, and we know when they were pushed out, and we know to where geographically they were pushed out. Over a 5-month period, we run this, and we suck down more than 1 million binaries, which correspond to 9,000 distinct specimens. Here, you can't really see the detail on it, but I want to give the flavor of what sort of stuff was pushed out by one program over a 1-month time period. So this is from August 1st to the end of the month, August 31st. Each line here is a different malware family. We've got either just points or lines, depending on when it was pushed out to us as we were milking. A long line means there was an ongoing campaign that kept pushing it out, and just the points meant there was some small batch that was being sent. Down here is a legend saying what type of malware it was, and the details for our purposes are not important at this point, but what is salient is that there's all sorts of types. This is not just what the spammers are using or what the fake antivirus people are using. All this badness is being pushed out through pay per install. Indeed, we were able to show that of what was considered at the time the world's top 20 malware families, more than half showed up in our milk. Now, what's exciting about this possibility is that we get illumination of malware as it is currently happening. We get a sort of live feed of what is the latest thing, badness, that people are trying to push out. Illustrate this here. VirusTotal is a community resource where people can report malicious binaries. The huge database of what badness has been seen, and part of what you can get when you query it is when did VirusTotal first see the badness. So we took all of our specimens and we put them through VirusTotal. This is a plot of when, how far from when we got it did VirusTotal know about it. So there's a small number that were old news. VirusTotal knew about it before we saw it. There are a bunch here that it did not know, and it took, in fact, days for VirusTotal to have visibility into it after we had visibility into it. And then there was a non-trivial subset that just never was known to VirusTotal. Potentially, these are boutique installations that are small size, and therefore, no one who actually received it wound up submitting it. Here, I've blown up this earlier region, and we can see that on average, when we get a specimen by this milking procedure, it is a week and a half before it is known to VirusTotal. So it's an exciting capability to see what's happening in real time. Finally, I illustrate here, and this is a little hard to read, but I'll walk you through what matters. Different malware families and which countries did they show up in. So we're able to see that this ERTFR malware is targeting Europe and to a smaller extent the United States. Gleishug is just being pushed out to the United States. So when our milkers were coming from IP addresses around the internet other than the US, we just were never given Gleishug. And rootstock is just shoved out the door to anything that comes its way. It has no geographic preference at all. In fact, this was fascinating because later we were able to show with very high probability, very high likelihood, the rootstock botnet operator of that particular malware was the pay-per-install service. So when they had spare capacity, they would just go ahead and push out their own malware on the side. Okay, let me shift gears here to social net accounts. So that was one type of infiltration, which gave us really quite striking intelligence as to what is currently being done with malware. Here we're going to look at a different facet. We got into this sort of inadvertently. There was an event in Russia a couple years ago where there were parliamentary elections. And there was a sort of firestorm of protest in Russia alleging that the elections had been fraudulent. A bunch of protests occurred. This is from one in Moscow. The sign this guy has, "We are 146%, refers to a screen capture off of a local news station that showed the voting tallies for one district totaled 146% of the number of voters in the district. All right, so now, these protests were in part coordinated via Twitter. And in Twitter, when you are trying to reach a large audience for some purpose, like, hey, let's all go down to the park and protest and bring signs that say this and do the following, you use hashtags. This is one of the main hashtags that was used. So the tweets would have that hashtag, and anybody who wanted to know what's up with the protest could search on the hashtag. What was fascinating for us, studying sort of social network abuse in general, is that during this coordination, more than 20,000 Twitter accounts started tweeting tweets with these hashtags, but with junk in the tweet. Or even with messages saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, So the goal here with all these junk messages or spam messages was to make it difficult for the organizers to coordinate their protests. This now was pretty interesting to us because, whoa, 20,000 accounts, that's somewhat striking. We were able to work with Twitter and get a bunch of information related to this. I'll show you one salient aspect of it. We could categorize all of the tweets that use various hashtags like that triumphal into either legitimate or spam. The spam was not that hard retrospectively to identify. Of the legitimate, we could geolocate where it came from. More than half came from inside Russia. On the other hand, of the junk, only 1% came from inside Russia. And in fact, the rest of it came from all over the world. That, along with some other analysis of the accounts, when they were created, similarities in their creation and so forth, allowed us to identify that these 26,000 accounts that did these tweets from all over the world were bought. They were not created for the event. They were bought from a service that provides accounts for spamming on Twitter. So a service that sells synthetic accounts. The actor here went and bought those from the cybercrime underground, not to use for monetization, but to use for manipulating political discourse. In addition, we were able to identify that this 26,000 was part of nearly a million. So these synthetic accounts were in fact being done on a huge scale. That then got us interested into the marketplace for these accounts. Now, you can go to this site today, buyaccs.com, and actually won't attack you if you do it. You can see this is also, again, in Russia. This is a huge clearinghouse for buying mainly synthetic accounts. And they include all sorts of types. Mail.ru, for example, is Russia's equivalent of Gmail. You can buy those. So we bought. We work with a colleague who is very capable in terms of engaging with the underground. And we went and bought from 24 merchants about 120,000 synthetic Twitter accounts. We had Twitter's permission to do this. Cost us about $5,000. So we have all these accounts. And then, working with Twitter, we can go to the backend database associated with those accounts and their registration. We can pull up a bunch of information about accounts. Here I've shown, for example, what was the name used, what's the screen name, what's the email associated with it. And there are other data, such as what were the events associated with the account being registered. The interesting part then is take this data, we develop classifiers that could recognize the pattern used by the merchant to bulk create all these accounts. So we could develop these classifiers that would recognize, oh, that's buyx.com's account. That's how they create them. That's the pattern they use. Then we went to Twitter and said, how good is this classifier? And we had a nod. It's the sort of machine learning-based paradigm where we can adjust our precision recall. We knew that Twitter would want such a thing to have very, very low false positives because they don't want to disrupt legitimate users and would be willing to tolerate some loss of true positives to get that. So the classifier we developed, the precision was better than 99.99%. Recall 95%, meaning we would miss about 5% of what we knew were in fact synthetic accounts, but we would get essentially, all but 1 in 20 accounts we would still get. We then ran this on their entire account database. Twitter, somewhat understandably, did not want an exact number associated with this, but did allow us to say there were millions of such accounts. So we found millions of accounts. And then the cool part was, given that precision, Twitter was willing to cancel them all. So they canceled these millions of accounts. When we go back to this site, buyx.com, and sure enough, Twitter accounts not available, we'll start selling them shortly. Their stock was gone. And in fact, this is from a discussion that our Infiltrator colleague had with one of the merchants. The merchant says, hey, my whole stock got suspended. And it's not just me, it's my buddies too. Everybody who knows what Twitter has done. So right after we did this extinction event, we then would try to purchase accounts, and either we're told things like this, or we're given accounts that, in fact, were dead on arrival, already been suspended. Now, the extinction part was a one-off. We worked with Twitter. We did it. We went and measured the marketplace reaction. That's it, though. And a couple weeks later, they're busy creating accounts, and now only about 50% of what we bought was dead on arrival. In general, something I should frame about this infiltration style approach, it is a huge amount of work. And in particular, it also not only is a lot of work, you got to just figure out all the pieces to actually engage and conduct meaningful measurement and so forth, but it's this sort of high risk work where you're really not sure at the end of the day you'll have a great result or not. So the students, it's challenging for the students to maintain their morale and the like. In particular, you would think after this result, hey, it would be great, why don't we just keep doing this? And here we have a tension between, well, what's publishable research and what is operationally useful to a company like Twitter. It's, I think, very interesting also the challenges companies face to, the tech transfer here is challenging. How does the company turn around and start doing this sort of infiltration? All right, so let me summarize here. The theme I've been developing is that we live now in an ecosystem of internet attacks that are striking in terms of scale. Scale is really amazing. Remember that, by the way, the pricing for installs is in units of thousands. just no point pricing it below that. And that has accelerated the sort of whack-a-mole arms race, because we now have more actors incented to figure out exploitations. They've gotten more efficient at it. That whole PPI ecosystem enables people to specialize solely in knowing how to break into your system, not having to know anything about how to then take advantage of having done that. It's decoupled the different elements that go into making money off of internet attacks. However, this scale also opens up all sorts of facets of that ecosystem to infiltration. And infiltration can be very powerful in terms of illuminating facets of the sort of end-to-end enterprise that are brittle or vulnerable in ways that perhaps technical defenses can't do. So in the pay-per-install infiltration, we get a real-time feed of malware. You have your latest and greatest way to monetize broken systems that have been broken into. By getting this intelligence, we can know essentially as soon as it goes out that it's there. The account purchasing has shown how we can disrupt the staples that are used, the sort of raw materials that are used in all sorts of abuse. Finally, I didn't have time to talk about this one, but I'll sketch it briefly, and then I'm done. We did work, this is particularly with our colleagues at UC San Diego, on of all the elements that go into making money selling Viagra with spam, which are the structural bottlenecks? Is it getting the domain names? Is it running the name servers? Is it the volume of spam you can push out? Is it the web front ends? Is it the availability of attractive merchandise? Is it the shipment of the merchandise? Which of those? And the key vulnerability that we found was just very stark was credit card processing. The fact that by doing a whole bunch of purchases, that's our infiltration angle, we were able to trace all these pieces. And from those purchases, by being able, and this again took a key partnership, to see which banks had cleared the credit card transaction, we were able to show 3 banks did 95% of it in the entire world. And therefore, by disrupting the credit card process payment through those banks, could demonetize, just render these Viagra sites unable to collect money. A very striking result. Has nothing to do with the technical facets of sending spam or takedown of bots or anything like that. Everything to do with the adversary's motive. So in summary, these infiltration techniques can just potentially be hugely effective, much more so than pointless defense. Okay, I'll stop there. I think maybe I have time for a question or such. Thank you. Why is this not the next round of whack-a-mole? That's a great question. I mean, I think for sure we will see an arms race here in evolution. What is interesting is that structurally, some of it is just a harder race for them to play. The credit card processing one is very stark in that fashion, because to actually set up merchant bank accounts is a pain, real pain, that it turns the asymmetries around. This is something that's painful for them, for the attackers to have agility. For the underground marketplaces, our goal wouldn't be to have them go away, but to gum them up, make them much less efficient. And so that would be the thinking of where we're going. And so it's not whack-a-mole in the sense of where for today, there's so much innovation with attacks, and we're constantly plugging holes. This would be a lot more focused.